As I sobbed on the kitchen floor, I could hear the laughter of the person who was supposed to protect me. A mother should defend her children, my grandmother used to say. It took me years to understand that sometimes protection has to come from our own actions, and what I did that day with a tube of superglue will shock all of you. Good morning, my dear friends. What a joy to be able to chat with you today. I'm Minerva Blackwood. Though everyone just calls me Minerva, I'm 73 years young and I'm speaking to you directly from my little home in Millfield, Pennsylvania. I was born in Philadelphia, but life brought me to this little corner of rural Pennsylvania many years ago. And it's here that I found my little piece of peace. These days, my greatest joy is creating artwork. I have notebook after notebook filled with illustrations, landscapes, flowers, faces of dear people who've passed through my life. And not just any materials will do. I've become a true collector of high-quality pencils and special pens. My grandchildren joke that Grandma here spends more on art supplies than they do on computer games. And it's not a lie, you know. I started this hobby after I retired from sewing. I sewed my whole life, you know. Fingers calloused from pulling thread and needle, eyes tired from focusing on tiny details. When I stopped, I felt an emptiness. It was my neighbor, Mrs. Eleanor, who introduced me to the world of drawing. She gave me my first professional colored pencil set and signed me up for a basic class at our local community center. She used to say, "Manva, every stroke tells a story. Every color awakens an emotion." And wasn't she right? I'm sitting now on my porch with a view of the fields that stretch as far as the eye can see. In front of me is my album of recent drawings and a wooden box with my imported pens that I order online. I have an old wooden table that belonged to my grandmother, where I spread all my materials while I draw and listen to country music on my little radio. The breeze today is cool, bringing the smell of freshly cut grass and the apple pie I baked yesterday. And you, my dear friends who are watching me now, tell me in the comments which town are you watching from? And what time of day did you find this video? Early morning with your coffee, after lunch or already in the evening? I always read all the comments and I'm so happy to know where you're from, and when you take time out of your day to listen to this grandma's stories. Let me know. Okay, let's create a chain of affection. Oh, and if you like this beginning of our conversation, don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel. It helps this grandma here continue telling her stories. And look, today I'm going to talk about a difficult but important subject. I was born in Philadelphia in 1952 when the city still had a small town feel, you know. My mother, Eleanor Blackwood, was an elementary school teacher, one of those who taught the first letters with a dedication that's hard to find nowadays. My father, Walter Blackwood, worked for the U.S. Postal Service, carrying letters and news through the streets of the city. We were a simple family, but we never lacked the essentials. Our house was in the Germantown neighborhood, a little wooden house painted light blue with a small yard where my mother planted herbs and some flowers. It had only 2 bedrooms, one for my parents and another that I shared with my 2 siblings, Harrison, 3 years older than me, and Amelia, 2 years younger. Oh, how difficult it was to share that small space. But when you're a child, you turn any little corner into an entire world, don't you? The routine was always the same. We would wake up early, have breakfast with homemade bread and grape jelly that my mother made, and then my siblings and I would go to school. I remember the navy blue uniform with the white collar, knee-high socks, and the brown leather satchel my father gave me when I started elementary school. It was my greatest treasure. After school, while my mother finished preparing lunch, we played in the yard. Jack's hopscotch hide-and-seek. Our imagination had no limits. We also had the neighbors Mr. Smith and Mrs. Smith's children, Eddie, Susan, and Tommy. The 6 of us formed quite a group, inventing games, climbing trees, running after kites. My father would arrive from work always at 6:00 in the evening, punctually. I would hear the sound of the key in the lock and run to greet him. On good days, he would pick me up, spin me in the air, and call me my little princess. On other days, well, he would come in tired, in a bad mood, and go straight to the bedroom to change clothes. On those days, my mother would signal for us to stay quiet, to not bother Dad. Over time, the good days became increasingly rare. My father started coming home later and later, sometimes with a strong smell of alcohol. On such nights, my mother would send us to the bedroom very early, but even with the pillow over my head, I could hear the arguments, the harsh words, sometimes the sound of things breaking. One Sunday morning, when I was 9 years old, I woke up to a noise in the kitchen. Different from the usual, it wasn't the smell of fresh coffee that filled the house, but a heavy, tense atmosphere. I got up on tiptoes and went to peek. My mother was leaning against the stove with a red face and an improvised bandage on her eyebrow. My father, sitting at the table, drank coffee in silence as if nothing had happened. It was on that day that I saw my mother cry for the first time. Not in front of him, but hidden by the washing machine, thinking nobody could see her. I stood paralyzed, not knowing what to do. A 9-year-old child doesn't really understand these things, but feels them. And how I felt a tightness in my chest, a desire to protect my mother, even without knowing how. At school, I was a dedicated student, always with the best grades. Teacher Martha said I had a special gift for drawing and encouraged me to participate in art contests. It was she who gave me my first box of colored pencils. Not the simple ones, but a set of 24 Prismacolor pencils which I kept as a treasure. Drawing became my refuge, my way of escaping reality when it became too heavy for a girl to carry. My brother Harrison grew up becoming more and more like our father. Not only in appearance, but in temperament as well. When he turned 14, he was almost the size of our father and began to repeat some behaviors he saw at home. I remember once he deliberately broke Amelia's toy just because she wouldn't lend it to one of his friends. When she cried, he laughed the same way Dad did when Mom was sad. Family Sundays, which should have been days of joy, were the ones I feared most. Dad would drink from early on, watching football on the black and white TV we bought in 1965 when the Green Bay Packers won the Super Bowl. Any mistake by Mom, food not cooked right, a poorly ironed shirt, became a reason for shouting. We children would huddle, drawing or playing quietly in the bedroom, trying to make ourselves invisible. That's how I grew up, between fear and hope, fear of what could happen when the door closed. Hope that one day things would change. Amid all this, I found in drawing and colors a way to color a world that often seemed too gray for a child. Perhaps that's why even today, at 73, pencils and pens are my inseparable companions. They saved me when I most needed salvation. When I turned 13 in 1965, my life began to change. I was no longer a little girl, I was becoming a young lady, and this seemed to bother my father even more. The rules became stricter. I could no longer play on the street with the boys. I couldn't wear clothes that he considered flashy. And for him, any dress with a brighter color was already a cause for scandal. A decent girl doesn't go around showing herself off, he would say, pounding on the table. Adolescence is difficult for anyone, but for me it was like walking through a minefield. My mother tried to protect me as best she could, but she herself lived in such fear that sometimes her protection was just a pleading look for me to obey without questioning. I remember the day of my middle school graduation. I was so excited. I had managed to be top of the class, and the school was going to give me a certificate of merit. I spent the whole week dreaming about that moment, imagining my parents proud in the audience. I even sewed a light blue dress with my mother's help in secret while Dad was at work. On the night of graduation, I got all dressed up happy. When my father came home from work and saw me in the dress, his face completely changed. "What's this nonsense?" he shouted, pointing at me. I explained about the graduation, the certificate, showed him the invitation the school had sent. He took the paper, tore it to pieces, and threw it on the floor. "You think I'm going to let my daughter parade in front of the whole town? For what? So boys can stare at you? No way." My mother tried to intervene. "Walter, it's just a graduation. The girl studied so hard." That's when he turned to her with that look we knew well. "You shut your mouth. I didn't ask you anything." I ran to the bedroom crying while I heard him shouting that education was useless, that a woman needed to learn to take care of the house and obey. That night, I lay down still in my blue dress, hugging the pillow to muffle the sound of my sobs. The worst wasn't just the pain of humiliation, but seeing how my brother Harrison watched everything and slowly began to repeat the gestures, the words, even the tone of voice of our father. He was 16 at that time and was almost the size of Dad. He started giving me orders too, as if he were my second father. Go wash my clothes, clean my room, and if I complained, he would run to tell Dad that I was disrespecting him. My sister Amelia, being younger, didn't suffer as much yet, but I could see in her eyes the same fear I felt. I tried to protect her as best I could, secretly doing her chores, making up excuses when she did something wrong. It was as if we had created a small survival system inside that house. School became my only refuge. There, I could be myself at least for a few hours. Teacher Martha noticed my talent for drawing and began to give me special materials and books about art. She noticed that something wasn't right. Perhaps from the dark drawings I made, always with small figures hidden in corners under large threatening shadows. One day she called me after class. "Minerva, your drawings are very expressive," she said, leaping through my art notebook. But I noticed so much sadness in them. Is everything okay at home? I felt a lump in my throat. I wanted so much to tell to vent, but my father's words echoed in my head. What happens inside the house stays inside the house. So, I just forced a smile and said everything was fine, that it was just my artistic style. She didn't insist, but before I left, she gave me a new notebook with a hard cover and thick pages. For your special drawings, she said. Sometimes when we can't say what we feel, we can draw it. That notebook became my diary, my confidant. Every night after everyone was asleep, I would draw the scenes of the day, the fears, the hopes, and then hide it under the mattress. It was my way of not suffocating with everything I couldn't express out loud. In the summer of 1967, when I was 15, something happened that changed everything. My father lost his job at the post office. I never knew for sure why, but I suspect it was because of the drinking. He came home that day with bloodshot eyes, throwing his bag on the floor with such force that it broke the lamp in the living room. It was those jealous good-for-nothings, he shouted, walking back and forth. But they'll see. I'll show them. In the following days, he started drinking earlier from breakfast on. Money became tight and soon my mother had to sell some jewelry she had saved, a memento from her grandmother. She started doing cleaning jobs in secret to help with expenses, leaving very early and returning before he woke up from his long drinking bouts. Harrison, who had already finished high school, got a job as a helper in an auto repair shop. It seemed that finally he was going to take a different path from his father. But no, all the money he earned, he spent on fun, never bringing anything to help at home. And the worst, he started inviting friends to drink with him on weekends. Noisy young men who looked at me and Amelia in a way that made us run to the bedroom and lock the door. It was on one of those Saturday afternoons that everything exploded. Dad was sleeping, drunk as usual, when Harrison arrived with 3 friends. They brought bottles of whiskey and spoke loudly, laughing. Mom asked them to be quiet so as not to wake Dad, but they ignored her. I was in the kitchen helping Mom prepare dinner when one of Harrison's friends, a guy named Nick, came in. I remember the strong smell of alcohol when he approached, saying he wanted to get to know Harrison's little sister better. I tried to move away, but he held my arm tightly. My mother immediately dropped what she was doing and stood between us. "Leave my daughter alone," she said with a firmness she rarely showed. "Get out of my kitchen now." Nick laughed, but when he was about to respond, we heard a crash in the living room. My father had woken up and knocked over a chair as he got up. He came staggering into the kitchen, eyes half closed, trying to understand what was happening. "What's all this racket? Who are these people?" he asked, pointing to the young men in the living room. "They're my friends, Dad," Harrison answered, standing up. "They came to celebrate with me." My father looked around, then fixed his gaze on me and my mother in the kitchen with Nick still standing near the door. Something in his eyes changed. "So that's it. I barely turned my back, and you're already bringing men near your sister. Are you trying to turn our house into what? Dad, it's nothing like that." I tried to explain, but he was already beside himself. In seconds, the scene turned into chaos. My father lunged at Nick, pushing him against the wall. The other young men came running, and soon they were all shouting and pushing each other. My mother pulled Amelia and me to the bedroom, locking the door. We stayed there hugging and trembling, hearing the sound of things breaking, screams, and then the sound of the front door slamming shut. Silence. Minutes later, knocks on the bedroom door. "Open up," it was Harrison's voice. "They're gone." When we opened, I saw my brother with a red face, a cut on his eyebrow. The living room was a disaster. Chairs toppled, glass shards on the floor, drink stains on the walls. My father was lying on the sofa with a bleeding nose. "Look what you did," said Harrison, pointing at the 3 of us. "You caused all this." My mother, who always stayed quiet, stepped forward. "No, Harrison. You brought this mess into our house. You're following in your father's footsteps, and this isn't going to end well." It was the first time I saw my mother confront someone like that, and for an instant I saw fear in Harrison's eyes. But soon his face hardened again. "You women never understand anything," he replied before leaving and slamming the door. That night, as we cleaned up the mess, my mother looked at me with different eyes, more determined. "We need to change this, daughter," she whispered so only I could hear. "We can't keep living like this." That's when I began to realize that maybe there was a way out. Maybe we could do something beyond just surviving day after day. In my drawing notebook that night, for the first time, I drew an open door with light coming through it. It was a simple drawing, but it represented something that was beginning to be born inside me. Hope. After that night of confrontation, things at home got even worse. My father, without a steady job, spent his days at home watching our every move. The savings money ran out quickly, and we began selling some furniture, then some of my mother's jewelry. The atmosphere was one of silent desperation. Harrison was increasingly absent, leaving early and returning late, sometimes not showing up for days. When he came, he always brought that smell of alcohol we knew so well. He and my father now argued constantly. Two equally stubborn men fighting for a control that was slipping between the fingers of both. It was 1968. I was 16 years old and already in my last year of high school. Teacher Martha had entered me in a state student art contest without telling me. One day she called me after class. "Minerva, you won second place," she said, handing me an envelope. "There's a cash prize and the opportunity to exhibit your drawings in downtown Philadelphia." I was speechless, alternating between joy and dread. It was the greatest honor I had ever received. But how to tell this at home? How to ask permission to go to the exhibition? "Your talent is a gift, Minerva," continued Martha, holding my hands. "Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." That night, I showed the envelope to my mother while we washed the dishes. She read the award letter, then hugged me tightly. I saw tears in her eyes, but also a different sparkle. "We'll find a way," she whispered. "Don't tell your father anything for now." In the following days, she began to save coins from the change from groceries, hiding them in an empty sugar can. When Amelia asked what that was, she just smiled and said it was our little secret. 2 weeks before the exhibition, my father discovered about the prize. Someone from the neighborhood had commented, "How proud you must be of your artist daughter." "Huh, Walter." It was enough. He came home that afternoon and went straight to my room, turning over drawers until he found the envelope and the award letter. "What is this?" he shouted, waving the paper in front of me. "Been showing off around town without my permission." I tried to explain to say it was just a school contest, but he didn't want to listen. He tore the letter to pieces and threw it on the floor. "As long as you live under my roof, you'll obey my rules," he vociferated. "Enough of this drawing nonsense. You're old enough to learn useful things." My mother, hearing the shouts, came running. "Walter, it's just a school contest. She has talent. The teachers recognized." That's when he turned to her with a look I'll never forget. "You knew about this? You were hiding it from me." And before she could answer, I saw his hand rise. The sound of the slap echoed through the house. My mother fell against the wall, holding her face. I ran to help her, but my father pushed me away. "It's your fault," he shouted. "What are you trying to be? An artist? Is that what you want to teach your sister too?" That night, I locked myself in the bedroom with Amelia, who cried softly. I took my drawing notebook and began to tear the pages one by one as tears streamed down my face. It was as if I were tearing pieces of myself. "Why are you doing this?" asked Amelia between sobs. "Because it doesn't matter anymore," I replied. "We'll never get out of here." But my mother had other plans. The next day she appeared in my room while I was making the beds. "Don't throw away your drawings," she said, handing me a new notebook. "Hide it well. Keep drawing. No one can take this away from you." There was something different about her, a determination I had never seen before. "I'll find a way for you to go to that exhibition," she continued in a low voice. "Your father is going to Pittsburgh next week looking for work at your cousin's construction company. He'll be gone for 3 days. The plan was simple. While my father was away, I would go to the exhibition with Teacher Martha, who had offered to accompany me. My mother would take care of Amelia and would invent an excuse in case Harrison showed up. But things rarely go as planned. On the eve of my father's trip, Harrison came home drunk in the middle of the night. I heard noises coming from the living room and got up to see what was happening. My brother was lying on the sofa with a cut on his face. My father, standing, was shouting something about family honor and man of the house. Apparently Harrison had gotten into a fight at a bar because of a girl. "You're just like me," my father was saying, pointing his finger. "You have the same hot blood, but you'll never be a real man if you don't learn to control your house." Then, to my horror, he began to teach Harrison how to impose himself. "Women are like dogs, son. If you don't show who's boss from the beginning, they take over. Look at your mother there, already wanting to give orders, hiding things from me. And your sister, thinking she's an artist." I returned to the bedroom in silence, feeling a knot in my stomach. The trip was canceled, of course. My father decided he couldn't leave the house without control. The exhibition happened without me, and the cash prize, which never reached my hands, was probably pocketed by the school. In the following weeks, the tension at home was palpable. My father watched every step of my mother, suspicious. One night, I saw him going through her drawers looking for something. When he found the can with the saved coins, His face turned red with anger. He confronted my mother in the kitchen, throwing the coins on the floor. "What is this? Were you saving money for what? To run away? To abandon me?" She denied it, said she was just saving for emergencies, but he didn't believe it. The discussion escalated and soon the shouts turned into sounds of struggle. I ran to the kitchen in time to see my father holding my mother by the hair, forcing her to kneel. "Stop!" I shouted, trying to pull him away. "Leave her alone." He pushed me with such force that I fell against the stove, hitting my head. Everything became blurry for a moment. When I could focus again, I saw my mother being dragged to the bedroom. The door slammed and the sounds that followed. Even today, I have nightmares about them. Amelia came running, frightened by the noise. I hugged her tightly, covering her ears with my hands, murmuring that everything would be all right while trying to contain my own tears. The next morning, my mother appeared in the kitchen with a swollen face and a cut on her lip. She prepared breakfast in silence, avoiding our gazes. My father, sitting at the table, read the newspaper as if nothing had happened. It was on this day that I noticed something had broken inside her. It wasn't just the black eye or the split lip. It was something deeper, as if a light had gone out. She moved like a ghost through the house, mechanically doing her tasks. But at night, when everyone was asleep, I heard a sound coming from the bathroom. I got up on tiptoes and saw my mother sitting on the floor crying silently. Next to her, a small suitcase where she was putting some clothes. Our gazes met. She put her finger to her lips, asking for silence, then signaled for me to enter and close the door. "We're leaving here," she whispered, holding my hands. "You, me, and Amelia. We can't stay anymore." My heart raced. "Where to? How?" "I have a cousin in Millfield," she explained. "She can take us in for a while until we find a place." I saved a little money from the cleaning jobs. It's not much, but it's enough for the bus tickets. The idea of escaping was both terrifying and liberating. What if my father found us? What if Harrison came after us? What if it doesn't work out? I asked, my voice trembling. My mother held my face between her hands. "And what if we stay here? Do you think it's going to get better? One day he might kill one of us, Minerva. I can't risk it. I can't stand to see you suffering like this anymore." We planned everything in secret in the following days. My mother sold her wedding ring to a neighbor for a fraction of its value. I hid my drawings and some photos inside a school book. Amelia was instructed not to comment on anything with anyone. The chosen date was September 15, 1968, a Sunday. My father always went to the bar after Sunday lunch and returned only at night, usually drunk. Harrison rarely showed up on Sundays. It would be our best chance. But on the morning of that Sunday, as we prepared lunch pretending normally, Harrison arrived unexpectedly. He seemed nervous, agitated. He asked to speak with our father in private. The two locked themselves in the bedroom for almost an hour. When they came out, my father seemed furious. He grabbed his jacket and left, slamming the door without saying where he was going. Harrison stayed sitting at the kitchen table, watching us with suspicious eyes. "What's going on?" asked my mother, trying to sound casual. "Did something happen?" Harrison gave a strange smile. "Nothing you need to worry about, Mom. But Dad asked me to keep an eye on the house today. Said you all have been acting very strange lately." My blood froze. Did he know? Had he discovered our plans? The following hours were the longest of my life. Harrison wouldn't leave the living room, controlling our every move. When I tried to go to the bedroom to get a book, he insisted on accompanying me. The suitcase we had hidden under the bed was partially visible. I saw his eyes narrow, but he didn't comment on anything. Back in the living room, he sat near the door like a guard. "You know, Mom," he said casually. "Dad told me he found some savings of yours. Said you've been hiding money. What would that be for?" "Huh." My mother, washing dishes at the sink, responded without turning around. "For emergencies, son. You know how difficult things have been." "Emergencies," he repeated with a sarcastic smile. "Like running away from home, for example." The plate my mother was holding slipped and broke in the sink. The silence that followed was deafening. "You think we're idiots," Harrison continued, standing up. "You think I didn't notice the clothes folded in the closet, arranged to leave, the suitcase under the bed, your whispers at night?" He approached my mother, who remained with her back turned, paralyzed. "Dad is right. You're not trustworthy. You need to be controlled." It was at that moment that I realized there would be no escape that day. Our plan had been discovered, and now we were in even greater danger. I saw in Harrison's gaze the same dangerous gleam that I had seen so many times in my father's eyes, as if a terrible cycle was repeating itself, passing from father to son like a disease. In the days that followed the discovery of our escape plans, life at home became even more suffocating. My father and Harrison took turns watching us like jailers of a domestic prison. The windows, once a portal to the outside world, now seemed like invisible bars, reminding us of the impossibility of escape. My mother seemed like a shadow, moving through the house without making noise, as if trying to disappear into the walls themselves. Amelia cried at night softly with her face buried in the pillow, when she thought no one could hear her. But I heard that muffled crying broke my heart night after night. The worst was the silence. A heavy silence loaded with fear and resentment, where the unspoken words were more threatening than any scream. In that October of 1968, it began to get colder earlier in Philadelphia. The cutting wind that came from the north with its relentless force seemed to reflect the ice that had settled inside our house. The gusts hit the windows during the night with a sad moan, as if nature itself was lamenting our situation. One particularly cold night when everyone was already asleep, I heard a muffled cry coming from my parents' bedroom. A different sound from the usual, deeper, more painful. I got up on tiptoes, the wooden floor creaking slightly under my bare feet. Through the dark hallway, I reached the half-open door and peeked through the crack. My mother was sitting on the edge of the bed under the weak light of the bedside lamp, applying a cold compress to her face. When she slightly turned her head, I had to cover my mouth not to scream. Her right eye was purple swollen and almost closed, a dark stain that spread across her cheekbone. At the corner of her mouth, a streak of dried blood. My father snored heavily beside her, as if nothing had happened. Something changed inside me that night. It wasn't anger. I was already well acquainted with that feeling that had burned in my chest for years. It was a cold, calm certainty, like water frozen in a deep lake, that we needed to do something or we wouldn't survive much longer in that house. When I returned to my room, I couldn't sleep. I lay looking at the peeling ceiling, counting the moisture stains until an idea began to take shape. I took my drawing notebook from under the mattress, and instead of the sad scenes as usual, abandoned houses, caged birds, solitary figures, I began to sketch a plan. The pencil strokes on the paper seemed to whisper a possibility I had never considered before. It was no longer an escape. It was a confrontation, a turnaround. The next morning, as I prepared breakfast, with hands still trembling from the sleepless night, I heard my father complaining about his knee in the living room. His usual hoarse voice, but with a sharp note of pain that wasn't common. "This damn thing is hurting more and more," he grumbled, massaging his legs stretched out on the worn sofa. "Feels like pins sticking inside. I'm going to apply that oil the pharmacist gave me." That oil, the miracle remedy he mentioned constantly. It was kept in the bathroom like a treasure, an amber glass bottle with a faded label on yellowed paper. It was a type of joint lubricant that he applied every night before sleeping, something that the pharmacist on the street below had recommended to him. The strong medicinal smell, a mixture of camphor and eucalyptus, permeated the entire house, an odor I had learned to associate with moments of truce, because when the knee didn't hurt, his mood improved slightly. When he left for work, he had gotten a job as a night watchman at a shoe factory on the other side of town. I waited for him to close the gate and disappear around the corner. With my heart racing, I called my mother and Amelia to the kitchen. "We need to do something," I whispered, looking out the window to make sure we were alone. I placed my open notebook on the table, showing them my drawing. It wasn't a work of art, just a simple sketch of the oil bottle and a pot of glue with arrows indicating the mixture. My mother, with her face still swollen and a purple bruise around her eye, looked without understanding. A scarf tied around her head tried to disguise the injury, but nothing could hide that pain in her eyes. "What are you thinking, Minerva?" she asked, her voice low and cautious, as if even the walls could denounce us. "He's getting more and more violent," I replied, gently touching her face, avoiding the injured eye. I felt her cold skin under my fingers, saw the slight tremor in her lower lip. "This oil is the only thing that relieves his knee pain. What if we replaced it with something else, something that instead of relieving would make the knee lock up?" Amelia, always perceptive despite her 11 years, understood immediately. Her eyes widened, a mixture of fear and admiration. "Glue, but won't that hurt him? What if he discovers it was us?" "Not more than he hurts Mom," I replied, a new determination in my voice, a tone that even I didn't recognize. "Not more than he hurts all of us. It's our only chance." My mother remained silent for a long moment, her agitated fingers twisting the worn apron. I saw in her eyes fear fighting against a desperate desire for liberation. It was like watching two powerful forces in collision, the terror cultivated over decades and a newly discovered spark of rebellion. Finally, she nodded, her eyes meeting mine with a new intensity. "We need to be careful," was all she said. But in those 4 words was an entire revolution. The plan was simple but risky. We needed glue. Not any glue, but one that would mix well with the oil, that would be transparent and strong enough to harden overnight. At the school supply store near the school, using money I had saved by selling small drawings to classmates, I bought a tube of transparent glue, the kind used in crafts, that dries slowly but becomes extremely hard. The saleswoman, Mrs. Parker, looked at me with curiosity when I asked for the strongest product she had. "What's it for, girl? School project?" she asked as she wrapped the tube in brown paper. "A gift from my father," I replied, avoiding her gaze. "He likes to fix things." In the afternoon, while my father slept deeply, he worked the night shift and slept heavily during the day, and Harrison was out with his friends. The 3 of us silently entered the bathroom. My heart was beating so hard in my chest that I feared its noise would wake my father. Every creak of the floor, every breath seemed amplified in that tense silence. With trembling hands, my mother opened the bottle of medicinal oil, that amber glass that seemed to hold our entire sentence. The strong smell invaded the small bathroom, making my eyes burn. She poured half the contents into the sink, the viscous liquid slowly running down the drain. Then carefully she took the tube of glue that I was holding and mixed the contents in the bottle, gently shaking so that the liquids would integrate. The consistency became a little thicker, but the difference was not noticeable at first glance, especially inside the dark glass. "What if he notices?" whispered Amelia, the fear evident in her voice, her large eyes fixed on the mixture we were making. She was hugging her old teddy bear as if that piece of cloth and cotton could protect her. "The strong smell of the medicine will disguise it," replied my mother, carefully closing the bottle and placing it exactly in the same position where it was before. "A never pays attention to these details. He just wants quick relief." We spent the rest of the afternoon in a state of silent nervousness. Every noise in the street made us jump. What if Harrison came back earlier? What if my father woke up and decided to use the medicine before the usual time? Guilt and fear mixed in my stomach like a bitter soup. That night, we had dinner in silence as usual. The meat was tough, the potatoes half raw, but nobody complained. My father seemed more irritated than normal, complaining about work, the food, the heat, everything. The knee, he said, was throbbing like a demon. After dinner, he dragged himself to the bathroom to perform his nightly hygiene. Minutes later, we heard the familiar sound of the bottle cap being opened. We exchanged tense glances at the table, unable to eat another bite. Amelia dropped her fork, which clinked against the china plate. My mother held her hand under the table. Time seemed to drag on. Each second was an eternity as we waited, the air heavy with anticipation. Finally, he came out of the bathroom and went to the bedroom without noticing anything different. We breathed relieved, but we knew the real test would come in the morning when the glue had enough time to completely harden. That was the longest night of my life. Lying in bed, eyes open in the dark, I mentally reviewed every detail of our plan. What would we do if it worked? And if it didn't, where would we go? With what money? The questions spun in my mind like a mad carousel. I couldn't sleep properly, tossing in bed, imagining 1,000 different scenarios. What if he discovered before time? What if the mixture didn't work? What if we were caught? The consequences would be terrible. The scream came before dawn, tearing the silence of the early morning like lightning in a clear sky. A howl of pain and rage that made the walls of the house tremble and chilled me to the bone. I jumped out of bed, my heart racing like a war drum. Amelia ran to my room in her white nightgown, looking like a frightened little ghost, and clung to me, trembling from head to toe. "What is this? My God, what is this?" bellowed my father, his uncontrolled voice echoing through the house. We heard the noise of something heavy falling, then dragged and irregular steps. He appeared in the hallway, stumbling out of the bedroom, clinging to the wall for support. His face was contorted with pain and fury, a grotesque mask in the half-light. But what most caught attention was the knee, visibly swollen under his pajama pants, with a wet stain spreading across the fabric. The smell of the medicine mixed with the glue was strong with a chemical note that wasn't there before. "What did you do?" he roared, advancing down the hallway like a wounded animal, dragging his rigid leg. My mother came out of the bedroom, tying her robe around her waist. Her face was as pale as wax, but there was something in her eyes that I had never seen before. A cold, calm, almost defiant. "What are you talking about, Walter?" she asked, her voice surprisingly firm. He advanced toward her, limping heavily, his face red with anger. "Don't pretend you don't know. Someone messed with my medicine. It's sticking. My knee is on fire, and I can't bend my leg." That's when something unexpected happened. Instead of backing away as she always did, my mother stepped forward, planting herself firmly in the middle of the hallway. How can you be sure? Maybe the pharmacist sold you a spoiled product. Or maybe, and here her voice gained a tone I had never heard before, it's just your body charging you for all the years of cruelty. The audacity of the response caught him by surprise. For a second, I saw doubt pass across his face, a flash of confusion in his bloodshot eyes, but soon the anger returned, multiplied like a fire hit by the wind. You liar. It was you, wasn't it? You and these two. You three are conspiring against me. I'll teach you who's in charge in this house. He tried to grab her by the arm, raising his hand to deliver a blow, but as he stepped forward, his knee gave way completely. The glue had hardened during the night, sticking the joint like cement. With a scream of pain that seemed more like an animal howl, he fell to the floor like a felled tree, hitting his head against the corner of the hallway table with a dry and alarming thud. Everything happened very quickly after that. Blood began to flow from a deep cut on his forehead, forming a dark pool on the wooden floor. He tried to get up, leaning on his elbows, but the knee wouldn't bend at all, causing him to fall again with each attempt. It was like watching an insect turned on its back, struggling helplessly. "Help me?" he shouted, his voice now mixing anger and fear. "Don't just stand there. Call an ambulance. That's an order." None of us moved. We stood there paralyzed, seeing that man who had terrorized us for so long. That figure who was larger than life in our nightmares, now reduced to a pathetic figure on the floor, bleeding and begging for help. There was something surreal about that scene, as if we were watching a movie instead of living it. "You'll pay for this," he threatened between groans of pain. When I get up from here, it was Amelia who broke the silence. Small, fragile Amelia, who always hid behind me or Mom when he raised his voice. She stepped forward, still holding my hand, but with her chin raised. "Let's go," she said, her voice small, but as determined as never before. "Now's our chance. He can't follow us." Those simple words spoken by that childish voice seemed to break the spell that kept us trapped in that house. To that man, to that life. My mother seemed to wake from a deep trance. Her eyes lit up with a sudden decision, as if all doubts had been swept away by a gale. "Take only the essentials," she said, her voice trembling slightly but firm. "We have 5 minutes." In a few frantic minutes, we took the few things we had prepared for our previous escape. Some hurriedly folded clothes, the important documents that my mother kept in a cookie tin at the back of the closet, the money she had managed to hide again after Harrison's discovery. I put my drawing notebook inside my shirt close to my chest. It was my most precious possession. Meanwhile, my father continued on the hallway floor, the blood forming a scarlet halo around his head. His screams had transformed into pleas interspersed with threats. "Eleanor, you can't do this. I'm your husband. The girls are my daughters. You owe me obedience. When I get better, you'll see." Before we left, my mother approached him, something new in her gaze. It wasn't hatred nor fear, but a quiet determination, almost solemn. For the first time in years, she looked at him from top to bottom instead of the other way around. "You left us like this for years, Walter," she said, her voice clear and calm, bleeding inside, begging for mercy. "Now it's your turn. May God have more mercy on you than you had on us." We walked out the front door without looking back as his screams became weaker, more desperate. The street was deserted at that hour of the morning, the sky beginning to brighten on the horizon with shades of pink and gold. On the sidewalk, I felt the fresh morning air filling my lungs, and it never seemed so sweet, so intoxicating. It was the taste of freedom. We walked quickly, almost running, our shadows elongated before us under the rising light. We didn't say anything until we reached the bus station, where my mother bought 3 tickets to Millfield with her still trembling hands, the small town where her cousin Grace lived. While we waited for the bus on the cold bench of the almost empty station, I asked my mother and Harrison, "He'll look for us when he returns home." She looked into the distance beyond the buses and the sleepy people, as if she could see something that wasn't there. A new serenity hovered over her, as if an immense weight had been removed from her shoulders. "He's just like his father," she replied with no anger in her voice, just a statement. "He'll need to take care of him now. Maybe that will teach him something we couldn't teach. Maybe not, but it's no longer our responsibility." The bus arrived with a roar of diesel engine and squeaking doors. We boarded for our new life, sitting together on the cracked leather seats. As Philadelphia was left behind, its streets and houses diminishing through the foggy window, I felt something strange in my chest. It wasn't happiness, not yet. It was too early for that. It was something more basic, more primordial, the feeling that for the first time in years, we could breathe freely. That life with all its uncertainties was still possible. My last drawing in that old notebook made during the trip while the bus jolted along the dirt roads showed 3 women, holding hands walking toward a sun that was rising on the horizon. Their figures were just silhouettes without detailed faces, but their bodies were erect, heads raised. It wasn't perfect. The lines trembled with the movement of the bus. The proportions were a little wrong, but it perfectly captured what we felt at that moment. Hope, not a naive hope, but one that is born after the storm, stronger because it knows darkness. The arrival in Millfield happened in October of 1968. We got off the bus exhausted, carrying only a bag with our few clothes and my drawing notebook. The bus station was small, just a waiting room with a ticket counter. Grace, my mother's cousin, welcomed us with open arms in her yellow house near the church. Widowed for 5 years, she lived alone, gave private lessons to children, and sold fruits from her small orchard at the Sunday market. "You'll stay here for as long as you need," she said, firmly grasping our hands. In the first days we lived in fear. With each knock on the door we thought it was my father or Harrison looking for us. But as the weeks passed we began to relax. A month after our arrival we received news. My father was hospitalized. The fall had caused a blood clot in his brain, and he was left with a permanently compromised knee. My mother found work as a helper in a small clothing factory while I returned to school to finish high school. It was there that I met teacher Olivia, who taught arts and noticed my talent for drawing. "You have a gift, Minerva," she said, leafing through my notebook. "We need to develop this." Olivia was different from anyone I had ever met. An independent woman who traveled alone, had her own car, and spoke several languages. She began to give me extra drawing lessons after school, lending me books and materials. In 1970, with her encouragement, I participated in a state art contest and won first place with a drawing that showed 3 women emerging from shadows into light. The prize included a scholarship to study at the School of Fine Arts in Philadelphia. At first, I was terrified at the idea of returning to the city. What if I met my father or Harrison? But Olivia convinced me, "You can't let fear control your life forever, Minerva. This is your chance." After much conversation, my mother agreed. She and Amelia would stay in Millfield, where they were already well established, while I would study in Philadelphia, living in a student house that Olivia helped me find. In August of 1970, at 18 years old, I returned to Philadelphia, no longer as a frightened girl, but as a young artist with a future ahead of her. During the 4 years of studies, I avoided the neighborhoods where we lived before. Eventually, I learned that my father had died in 1971 after complications from his head injury. Harrison had moved to the countryside after problems with the law. With my graduation in 1974, I got a job as an art teacher at a school in Millfield. I returned to be near my mother and Amelia, bringing with me not only a diploma, but the certainty that I had broken the cycle of violence that marked our family for so long. Art, which began as a refuge, became my salvation and my livelihood. Through it I managed not only to survive, but to find beauty in a world that for a long time had only shown me its darkest face. Today, at 73 years old, I live a peaceful life here in Millfield. Those who see me now with my white hair and my hands stained by time might not imagine the journey I traveled to get here. But each wrinkle on my face tells a story of struggle and overcoming. After graduating and returning to Millfield as a teacher, I devoted myself heart and soul to teaching art. I transformed the small room they gave me at the municipal school into a space of creation and freedom. My students, children of all ages, found there a place where they could express their feelings through colors and shapes. Just as I did one day, in 1977, I met Nathaniel, a carpenter who came from Reading to work on the church renovation. He had rough hands from hard work, but gentle eyes that reflected a good soul. Our approach was slow, full of hesitations on my part. The fear of trusting, of giving myself was still rooted in me. But Nathaniel was patient, respecting my timing and silences. We married in 1979 in a simple ceremony in Grace's backyard with only a few close friends. My mother, who had found in sewing her vocation and her livelihood, made my dress, a simple model in shades of light blue, nothing conventional, just like our story. Our son William was born in 1980, bringing a joy that I didn't know was possible. Seeing that little being grow in an environment of love and respect was the greatest healing for the wounds of the past. I promised myself that he would never know the type of home I grew up in. And I kept that promise. My mother, Ella Lehner, lived with us until 2005 when she passed away peacefully in her sleep at 78 years old. In her last years she was another woman. She smiled more, sang while sewing, played with her grandson. The shadow of fear had been replaced by a peace she so deserved. Amelia married a local merchant and had 2 daughters. She lives just 3 blocks from my house, and we visit each other almost daily. Sunday afternoon, coffee is sacred. She brings the cake, I prepare the coffee, and we spend hours talking about everything and nothing. I never heard from Harrison again. I heard he got married, had children, and then moved to the north of the country. Sometimes I find myself thinking about him not with anger, but with a kind of sadness for what could have been. He too was a victim in his way, of a cycle of violence that came from generations. Today I occupy my days between my studio at the back of the house, a gift from Nathaniel for my 60th birthday, and my drawing classes for children in the community. Even retired from formal school, I can't stop teaching. Seeing the sparkle in a child's eyes when creating their first drawing reminds me of the transformative power of art. My drawing notebook from that difficult time still exists, kept in a special box. Sometimes I open it to remember where I came from and how far I've walked. The trembling strokes of that frightened girl evolved into the confident brushstrokes of the woman I became. It's a reminder that we are capable of rewriting our story, even when the beginning seems like the darkest of tales. The nights in Millfield are calm, especially now in the fall. Sitting on the porch with Nathaniel, watching the stars appear one by one in the sky, I feel a deep gratitude for the life we've built. It's not a life without challenges or sorrows, that doesn't exist. But it's a life where love prevailed over fear, where freedom won over captivity. And when my granddaughters, William's daughters, come to visit me, bringing their own drawings to show me, I know that the cycle was broken. They grow up knowing what it is to be loved and respected, knowing the value of their own voice. This perhaps is my greatest legacy. My dear friends who have accompanied me this far, I want to leave with you not just a story, but a piece of my heart. Perhaps you who are watching me now are going through something similar or know someone who lives trapped in an invisible cage of fear. Looking back, I see that my life was like one of my drawings. It began with hesitant strokes, dark spots, broken lines, but gradually gained colors, light movement. The glue I used to lock my father's knee wasn't just an act of desperation. It was my first stroke of courage, the first brush stroke of a new life. I learned that age doesn't define our strength, but rather our ability to start anew each day. When I swapped the lubricant for glue, I didn't imagine that gesture would change everything, that it would be the beginning of my liberation. My wrinkles today are maps of survival. Each one tells a story of pain overcome, but also of love found. What I discovered, my dear friends, is that we are stronger than we imagine, especially when we think we can't take it anymore. That 16-year-old girl, trembling with fear while mixing glue into her father's medicine, had no idea of the woman, mother, and grandmother she would become. Time doesn't heal all wounds, but it teaches us to live with them and still smile. My story isn't about what they did to me, but about how I chose to respond. Each drawing I created, each class I taught, each moment of love with Nathaniel and my son were powerful responses to a past that tried to define me but couldn't. If you are in a situation of abuse or know someone who is, remember, life beyond fear exists, and it's more colorful than we can imagine in our darkest moments. I discovered that my voice, even trembling, had power when I decided to use it. And your silence today can transform into your song tomorrow. Now, my dear friends, if this story touched your heart, if something I shared made sense to you, do me a special favor. Hit that subscribe button right now and leave in the comments the word freedom. Not because I want numbers, but because each person who writes that word is declaring they understood the true meaning of this journey. Each comment with the word freedom shows me that my story wasn't in vain. That each tear shed, each night of fear, each uncertain step on the road to Millfield was worth it, because it found an echo in another soul. Always remember, the drawing of your life is not yet finished. You still have many colors to add, many strokes to define, much beauty to create. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Grandparents' Tales if you enjoyed my story today. I read all your comments and would love to know which town you're watching from.